humbly ask to accept my heartfelt apology.
The senator steps down. Frank Artiles ends the furor over his offensive speech by resigning his seat.
Death and desperation. Venezuelans' crisis is spiraling. We are live in Caracas today with the latest.
Dreamer deported. There are now conflicting accounts about why and how the Trump administration deported a young man who was supposed to have DACA protection.
Good morning. Welcome. As always, great to have you with us this morning. We begin with the firestorm and fallout in Tallahassee that took all the attention away from actual lawmaking this week.
South Florida State Senator Frank Artiles has resigned with an apology for an ugly, racist rant directed at several of his colleagues. Many lawmakers felt that Artiles' initial policy was insincere, that he had at first stood his ground when he should not have, but pressure continued to mount. Protests at his offices, editorials in newspapers calling for his resignation, and stories that spelled out Artiles' racist, sexist, and profane language directed at Senate colleagues in Tallahassee at a club on Monday night. And by Friday, the handwriting was on the wall. Artiles turned in his letter of resignation, more contrite than his first apology.
Senator Perry Thurston of Fort Lauderdale was there Monday night when Artiles used language that offended and insulted his Senate colleagues. Senator Thurston is a Democrat and chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. He is the one who filed a complaint seeking to have Artiles expelled originally. Senator Thurston, thanks for joining us live in studio this morning.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here.
We are so glad you are. And as a preface, let me say, Glenna and I both reached out late this week. Senator Artiles, we asked him to come in, tell your side of the story. We did not hear from him, but we are very glad you're here. So let's start with the basics. Explain to us, Monday night, you and a colleague had gone to a college baseball game, and you then on your way home, and you stopped by the Governor's Club, a very fancy, nice, upscale club, restaurant, bar in Tallahassee. And tell us what happened when you went in.
Well, that's right. We had just come from a game, Florida State and Clemson, and it was sort of about 10:30, and we were returning. I noticed that Senator Gibson's car was in the garage and called her, and she said she was there, and I proceeded to go over there. Went there for a couple of minutes and sat at her table. She had about 5 or 6 people there. A couple of people left, and about 10 minutes later, Artiles comes in. They began to have a conversation about their bills. Both had presented a bill earlier in the week, and
she had questioned, she had raised questions about his bill, and he apparently had not liked it.
Absolutely, and he was informing her that that's why he questioned her on her bill based on the fact that she had questioned him.
Yours was a first-hand account. There were people there who saw and heard what happened. And during the course of the week, we now know that there were several attempts, including by you, to connect an apology somehow. Is what happened more about what Frank Artiles said and did, or the fact that he subsequently did not apologize immediately?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. I believe that an apology, and sincere apology early on, and I attempted to get him to do that on several occasions, would have maybe lessened the impact or may have caused it to be some type of different conclusion. However, in retrospect, as I look at the language, the reprehensible nature of the language, I think that we are where we would have been ultimately.
Yeah. Senator, if I may, and I don't want to offend you or anybody in our audience, but we're going to use some very blunt language because I think it's important for people to understand what it was Frank Artiles said that was offensive to you and to, I think, any reasonable person. Right. First of all, Senator Audrey Gibson is an accomplished, mature black woman. He called her, in this conversation you heard, a girl and then a bitch.
That's exactly right. And one of the other ladies at the table, and this is how it came to my attention, I heard the girl and the bitch, but I didn't know it was being directed to her. And the other lady asked him, do you think that grown women want to be referred to as a girl or a bitch. And that's when I looked over and I said, well, what's going on here?
Well, that begs the question, how did Senator Gibson handle
Oh,
it?
well, she was flabbergasted. She was sitting there, you could tell she was insulted, and but they were continuing to have the conversation. As I say, the conversation is about legislative business, what we would think would happen every day.
Yeah.
But there's no excuse for that language, and then it got worse.
Well, then it got worse, and I will use a word you used when we spoke Friday. He used the word effing a-hole, but he was really referring to himself, apparently not to her, but maybe that wasn't clear at the time.
No, that's not what he was doing. In fact, I had left the table, and when I returned, Senator Gibson told me point blank, Thurston, he just referred to me as an effing a-hole. So I looked at him and I asked him, did you do that? He says, no. So then I looked back at her and she gave me the look like he absolutely just did it. So I looked at him and I said, you need to apologize to her. And he did. He says, well, I'm sorry. So there's no question about who he was referring to.
You know, I feel like before we ever hear from Frank Artiles and his side of the story firsthand, there's so much about what had happened, even with firsthand accounts, that is so confusing, not the least of which is the reports that he was referring to some GOP senators who supported Senate President Joe Negron and referred to them with the N-word.
Right.
But there are no GOP black senators.
No, there absolutely are not.
I'm so confused. What did he mean by that, and
that's
how many people should be offended by
Well,
that?
that's the important thing. After the F and A-hole, now I'm really paying attention to this conversation because I'm thinking, well, how could this get to this point? So his next comment is to go after the leadership of the Florida Senate. And his first comment is to refer to the Senate President, Joe Negron, as a F and P.
So much we can't say on
so much we
television.
can't say. But he said it several times. He's just an F and P. He's just an F and P. And by P, I mean like a woman's part. And he said it over and over. And at this point, Gibson is looking at me and I'm looking at her. And then he, in the next breath, says, and it's the 6 N-words who voted for him for leader. That's the only reason he's the president now.
But you explained when we spoke on Friday that in fact when he used the N-word, you questioned him and he said, oh, I didn't use the one that ends in R, I used the one that ends in A.
In fact, Gibson and I both stand up. She says, I'm out of here. She grabs her purse, and I think she's leaving, but she goes to the restroom. So I said to him, you can't say that. What do you mean? I said, did you just say? He says, no, I said A, you said ER. And I says, it doesn't matter. It's like, you can't say that in any context, but what I heard him say was ER.
Senator, when all is said and done, an after-hours conversation, ugliness between senators, did it have to end this way?
I don't think it had to end this way, but I don't think that I believe that he truly could have expressed his displeasure with his leadership and his displeasure with Senator Gibson without the language that he used. It's not like we get along all the time or we agree with each other, but there's a way to disagree. And even I give you an example. My wife was very offended by the B word even before the N word. So, and she's saying, who has the audacity to call a grown woman a state senator by that language? Now, I think that the N word is what escalated this to this proportion, but she's just as offended about the B word.
So no sense that this might have been free speech,
Well,
as ugly as it is?
I think even if you say free speech, in the Senate, we have Senate rules. And
Civility.
That's right. Rule 1.43 talks about civility, decorum, and integrity. So I don't think it's free speech, but you have to abide by the rules that we agreed to at the beginning of session. We voted on that.
All right, finally, to sort of button this up, you advised him to apologize quickly. All of this was Monday night when this awful conversation took place.
Absolutely.
He encountered Senator Gibson and you on Tuesday on a couple of occasions,
Let
and
me-
he did not apologize when he was face to face with her.
Which goes to the sincerity of the apology. Let me tell you, that night when Senator Gibson left, she didn't come back to the table. I told him I think we have a problem. Let's meet first thing in the morning. We'll go and see if she'll entertain an apology there. I called the Democratic leader, Brainen. We met. We're there at 8:30. We're going to go meet with him before 9 and go to her apology. We have a pre-session briefing at 9:15. At 9:08, he's still not there. I left him a message then. He's still no recall. And you're right, we were in a committee together. I'm here, she's here, and he's there. She leaves to go and present another bill, and I leaned over to him then and asked him, have you considered making that apology to her? And he still hadn't done it. It's my understanding when he came down with the Senators Galvano and Simpson that he had to be forced to do that.
But that was at 6 o'clock at night.
That's at 6 o'clock. That's correct.
All right. Senator Perry Thurston, we are very glad you came in. You are an authentic, reliable voice about what happened, and we are grateful to have you tell us about it.
And it's my pleasure to be here. I wish this was on different circumstances.
So do we.
Never
Agreed.
Want to have this type of situation.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you. When we come back, you will meet the reporter who broke this story. Stay with us. The after-hours and behind-the-scenes events that led to a senator's resignation became public with the work of some solid beat reporting.
Especially by the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times Bureau in Tallahassee. They just did excellent work on the Frank Artiles story, and leading the way every day was Patty Mazzei, who covers politics for the Miami Herald. She joins us live in the studio this morning. Patty, some outstanding reporting.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
No sleep for you yet.
No, but soon.
All right, sleep to come. All right, so you are assigned not normally to Tallahassee. You only arrived in Tallahassee on Monday of this week, so you arrive and uncover the biggest story to come out of the legislative session. How'd you do it?
Sometimes stories come along and you're there at the right place at the right time. I mean, I was there to see what was going on in the session, which, as we know, there are a lot of issues to resolve.
Sure.
And, you know, when you cover Miami-Dade politicians, you hear about their doings, good and bad.
So take us through, and especially for people who are watching this program who are not familiar with the minute-to-minute reporting process. This was a tip, started as a tip. What did you do? How did you follow this?
Well, it was a matter of finding out when folks wanted to talk about it, because I think reporters heard that there was an issue, but an incident, but as I think you saw with Senator Thurston, there was some reluctance to talk about this because they were giving Senator Artiles a chance to apologize and maybe have this not come to light.
Make it not a news story for,
Correct.
for the public consumption.
Correct. And I'm not sure if it would have become a news story either way, but certainly the repeated attempts to get an apology that were rebuffed led to more anger on the part of Senators Thurston and Gibson, who eventually sat down for an interview and just talked about on the record what had happened.
Right. And then on Wednesday, when Senator Artiles finally under huge pressure from Senator Negron, the Senate president, and his other colleagues, finally the session opened, he was there on the floor and gave this apology. What was it like? What was the feeling there in the Senate chamber?
Well, there was a lot of anticipation for it. It is a very rare occasion for this to happen, the Senate president to force one of his members to make this public statement. And when it happened, it was dramatic because every chair in the chamber turned to look at him, except for Senator Gibson's. And that gave everyone an indication that even though he had apologized in person and was now apologizing again in public, she was not completely in acceptance of what had happened. And afterwards, he spoke to reporters and talked about running for re-election and winning in 2018 and just sounded very defiant.
Well, and to Senator Thurston's point, he technically might have violated a Senate rule. So this goes beyond a nice kind of human-to-human apology. This was a potential violation of the oath he took in the Senate.
Well, the chambers police themselves, and so members of the legislature, depending on the chamber they're in, basically agree to the code of conduct that each chamber sets. So this is not a problem of the law. or some other agency coming in. This is the Senate itself deciding we're going to investigate a potential, conduct unbecoming a senator, which is what the complaint that Senator Thurston filed said.
So, I'm sorry. So like we did, you of course went to Senator Frank Artiles and gave him the opportunity to tell his side of the story and probe his intentions. And what kind of answers and reactions did you get?
Well, myself and another reporter on the story tried to talk to him at the end of a committee on Tuesday before the story broke. After having spoken to Senators Thurston and Gibson, he did not want to talk. He said, send me questions in writing. We did to his staff, got no response. And then eventually got a statement through a spokesperson where he acknowledged the incident and said it was wrong. But by that point, the story was out there and it was shocking to a lot of members of his own party, frankly.
Yeah. Patty, I think that Glenn has certainly spent a lot of time in Tallahassee over the years. I have as well. I haven't been up there this year. But, I mean, let's be realistic. A lot of lawmakers in private speak to each other forcefully, profanely, very directly. This doesn't happen on the floor of the House or the Senate. So it's not as if they don't speak bluntly to each other sometimes, but to use these words, bitch and girl and the N word and the P word and all this stuff, this just is so over the line.
Well, and Senator Artiles is known as a loyal friend and an aggressive lawmaker who really went after some issues that were important to his community. He covered represented Southwest Dade. Traffic issues were important. He always brought up the MDX tolls. These were issues that really mattered to people. So he was known as being a hard-charging senator. And you're right, there are a lot of conversations in private that are probably not appropriate in Tallahassee. But what the senators told us was that this was pattern of behavior because the senator had had past incidents that were controversial. A college student accused him of punching him. He said he hadn't. There were some jokes about the fact that he'd had a scuffle with a legislative aide. It was kind of a pattern, and that made it less acceptable than a one-off incident.
But nothing in his past, in any of those past alleged incidents, nothing came of those. Why?
That's a good question. And perhaps it's that his colleagues, when he used to be in the House, were more interested in backing him up. It's possible that, it takes 3 strikes, you're out, sort of to really turn into a big deal. And frankly, the Legislative Black Caucus took a very dogged position here that was not entirely expected from Republican leaders. There's one Black Caucus member who is Republican, but they did not let this go, even though politically they could have just let it go and had this be an election issue in 2018 and drag down Senator Artiles and the other Republicans. A special election is always risky for the Democratic Party because Republicans tend to be better organized and have more money, but they went for it anyway.
And Senate District 40, which he represented, voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton last November, even though
Senator Artiles won. Yeah, and that was a very big victory for the Republican campaign.
There's some big political ramifications coming up here.
We thought we wouldn't have an election this year, but here we are.
Here we go. Okay.
Patty, great to have you.
Thank you.
Again,
Always.
thanks and
Pleasure.
Congrats.
Yeah. All right, so many Venezuelans living in South Florida have a personal connection to the worsening conditions there. Our correspondent in Caracas has the latest on the crisis live next. This week, at least a dozen people have been killed during protests in several Venezuelan cities, the direct result of economic collapse and political unrest there. Street protests are growing against President Nicolas Maduro and his socialist government. Besides the backlash and violence, desperate citizens facing shortages of the basics are taking to looting and stealing.
And we have a chance now to connect directly by satellite with our colleague stationed in Caracas, reporter Cody Weddle. Cody, good morning. Glad to see you. Give us the latest situation. What is the situation on the ground this morning in Caracas?
Well, good morning to you guys. It appears, by all accounts, last night Caracas had its first relatively calm night in several days. As you guys mentioned, the past few nights have been very violent and chaotic here. At least 12 people have died in looting and ongoing conflicts with police, but last night it appears that things were mostly calm here. Yesterday, the opposition held another march through the city. This time they were holding what they called a silent march. It was intended to honor the people who have died so far in this latest wave of unrest, which is 20 people who have died so far in these ongoing protests. And it comes before protests again tomorrow. The opposition is calling for more mass demonstrations tomorrow. They're not only calling for demonstrations, but they're also calling for their supporters to sort of shut down this city, blocking interstates, blocking highways, and blocking roads in an attempt to show their force here.
Cody, you know, we for the past couple of years have been watching these government opposition protests in the streets. Boy, it seems like this weekend they have really taken on a bigger, louder tone. From your vantage point there, do you feel like this is the precipice of something to happen, some kind of change?
It's interesting. You know, I've been here for 3 years, and I can tell you that I have never sensed just the mood in the street, the tense mood in the street that we're seeing right now. You know, that mood is something we haven't seen here. There have been protests and there have been demonstrations, you know, for the past 3 years, but this recent court decision by the Supreme Court here to strip the National Assembly really seems to have set off and sparked unity among the opposition, which had been one of their biggest problems. It's a very fractious coalition, but it appears that they are now more unified than ever.
Well, I guess Enrique Capriles, who is one of the main opposition leaders, he and others there are saying you must call new elections, President Maduro. Is there any chance, do you think, that in fact Maduro is going to call a new election?
Well, I think Maduro is going to try to do everything he can to make sure the next presidential elections will be in 2018. That's when they are technically scheduled to happen, although recently courts here stifled an attempt to carry out a recall referendum against Maduro. Maduro has said that he is, quote, anxious to have regional elections. Now, that would be gubernatorial elections for all of Venezuela's states and state legislatures. He has said he's anxious to have those. Those constitutionally should have been held last year, so they're already delayed. We will see if those might be called within the next few days or months.
Corey Weddle, so great to have you stationed there in Caracas for us and for Local 10 all the time. Please stay safe, and we'll check back, I'm sure, with you tomorrow. Thanks again for being with us.
Now we want to bring in a friend of ours, Ernesto Ackerman. He is a native of Venezuela, an architect, a businessman in Miami for many years, and the creator of a group called Independent Venezuelan American Citizens. He founded it in 2013. It's a nonprofit that helps Venezuelan immigrants become U.S. citizens. Ernesto, welcome. Bienvenidos.
Thank you for having me.
We're very glad you're here. All right, so we just heard from our reporter on the scene, and I think that the question Glenna asked is really the right one. Venezuela seems to be on the precipice. How close to simply falling apart is it?
Well, yeah, I think it's still hard. These people can go anywhere because they were all the time involved in narco trafficking, terrorism.
The Maduro regime.
The Maduro government
Yeah.
or regime. They have a big problem as when they get down of government, where would they go? So I think the opposition has to keep the fight in the streets and keep going until they will do something and will need to step down.
You know, so often here on the news in South Florida, we watch governments and occurrences in other countries. It is not just international news, it is local news here to so many in South Florida, yourself included. You have family there right now, and we're interested in hearing from a citizen's perspective, what are they going through? People who just not very long ago got up, went to work, fed their families, and had a normal life. What is it like for your family there?
Well, as you know, I have a brother that suffers from cancer, and he cannot get the medicines in Venezuela. We need to smuggle the medicine.
Smuggle how? How does that work?
Through Colombia? Or,
I don't want to go into too many details.
Obviously, right, sorry.
But they smuggle through customs. So the medicine, food. My mother is 94 years old. She's alive, and she cannot get food. And we send her boxes of food from here, flour to do arepas and all that. So it's a very difficult situation. There is no private companies anymore, very little, few companies. You saw General Motors was seized
Just gonna mention,
Friday.
this week,
yeah.
So, you know, people is losing the jobs. There is nothing to do. So that's why the pressure now is so heavy.
Ernesto, the United States government, first under President Obama, now under President Trump, has taken certain action. They have singled out members of the Maduro government who they have indicted or they have said may not visit the United States. They own condos, some of them here in Miami. What else could the government, our government, do to help that they have not done?
Well, during the government of President Obama were only 6 sanctions. 6 people were sanctioned. President Trump right now already sanctioned the vice president of the country. That means a lot. I was last week or a week and a half ago in the OAS. I spoke to the ambassador of the United States.
The Organization of American States.
Correct. And I spoke to the ambassador of Canada, United States. There is a big pressure. Last year in the vote was 20 against the opposition, 10 pro-opposition. This year was 20 pro-opposition and 10 against. So internationally, it's changing also, and people is realizing that the people in Venezuela is suffering.
Yeah, well, we will stay on this story. We are committed to it. We've got a reporter stationed in Caracas, and we appreciate you coming in this
And
morning.
we thank you for that, because it must be known what's happening in Venezuela.
You'll be back.
Agree. All right.
All
Stay
right.
with us. Coming up next, it is the Roundtable.
Closer to you.
We have got so much to talk about this week with our Powerhouse Roundtable. So let's get right to introductions.
H.T. Smith, I'll start with this one. He's my friend. He's our friend. H.T. Smith, Miami attorney, civil rights leader, law professor at Florida International University.
Rafael Yaniz is a hospital executive in Miami, active in Republican politics. He graduated from the University of Florida and the University of Miami Law School.
And we are glad to welcome back Nancy Ancrum, editor of the editorial page of the Miami Herald. Good morning to all of you.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
Nancy Ancrum, I have been waiting to ask you this question. You are an accomplished journalist, an accomplished woman who happens to be black. When you heard that Audrey Gibson, a mature state senator, does a good job for her constituents, was called a girl and a bitch by Frank Artiles, did you reel back?
Well, that would have been an abomination no matter who this woman was, no matter what her color or ethnic origin.
Right.
It was just reprehensible, unacceptable, and I think that the outcome was the only one, given the tortured choreography of the apology and the lack of the apology and the resistance. It was the only outcome that could result.
You know, my takeaway from this week, I have to say, Michael was kind of doing the nuts and bolts story of what happened, and we were with people who had protested and called for apology, resignation, expulsion. I mean, this was Power to the People week. The people out there, day after day after day, I think drove the narrative.
Absolutely, and I think this is a shining moment, not only for the politicians of the state of Florida, but for the people of the state of Florida. This transcended politics for the first time in a long time. You had Frank Artiles saying to the leaders of the Republican Party, the Democrats are trying to make this take a political advantage. And the head of the party, the governor and the attorney general said, help me. They said, Frank, no, you must go. And then he went to the Senate and said, I'm going to bring out bad things that you all did.
Yeah.
Help me. They said, no, Frank, you must go. And then starting with his local newspaper, the Miami Herald, all around, we start hearing, Frank, no, you must go. But the people made the difference.
And the Sun Sentinel, let's note, also had a very strong editorial saying he's got to go as well as the Herald. Rafael, the fact is, from what I am told, that on Tuesday, when he did not apologize all day long, that there were a number of Republican state senators, House members, the party, who really got angry and said, he is offending us. We're not going to support this guy.
Correct. He really made his own bed here. And it cuts to the reprehensible nature of the words that you used earlier, quoting him, that if you have a woman in your life who you respect and you love, you should be offended. You should be hurt by these words.
We point out that this is a a man with young daughters. He's
A wife.
Exactly.
dad of girls.
But the good thing is that Hispanics and non-Hispanics were offended.
Right.
Men and women were offended. Democrats and Republicans are offended. And I want our young people to understand, many times they say our public service do things that offend them and are wrong and nothing happens. Martin Luther King taught us, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Artiles saw the justice. It was swift, it's severe. This was a shining moment for Florida.
Yeah.
So do you think that this is a new day, and that when people in those kind of public positions and elected officials do something that's offensive or outrageous, that it's not overlooked anymore?
No, I don't think it's necessarily a new day. I think Patty Mazzei was correct. That kind of rough and tumble language goes on behind closed doors all the time, both in Tallahassee and in our living rooms. I think that this was so egregious, so over the top, there really was no saving this.
And the context of it. It was a social environment. You brought it up
Right.
when Senator Thurston was recounting the evening. It was a Monday evening. People go to this governor's club to relax, to unwind. They're under stress. He dies around the corner.
And Senator Artiles, we don't know how many drinks he had, but he clearly had
Reports say
And
that he had been
acknowledged he did.
drinking.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, and although the language is rough and tumble, there's profanity.
Right.
This is sort of like a red line. Like nations can go to war, but you can't use chemical weapons. Politicians can fight strongly and even make mistakes, but there's a red line when you use hurtful hate speech.
And
that he
direct
crossed
it specifically face to face
yeah.
at a
Right.
person. He also miscalculated. He's a freshman senator. The Senate is a much more adult and collegial place.
Right.
And so just the shock of, he said what?
He
It
should
was
have
a stain.
apologized immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
And I
And it was
think
the
it's
arrogance of not apologizing.
Right.
And I think others are going to be a little more restrained in terms of using that kind of language. It will still be rough and tumble, but I think they see that's the red line right now.
Lesson learned?
I hope
Hopefully.
so. I hope so. And the people, I think, will continue to insist. Now that they see they can make a difference, I think they'll insist when something like this happens that you've got to have swift, severe repercussions.
And I think we ought to also note that the legislature was pretty much paralyzed for an entire week.
Right.
They only have an 8-week session. I mean, this week was all about Artiles, and I think nobody is more relieved probably than Joe Negron, the president of the Senate. He doesn't have to preside over a really messy, extended legal process, so they need to get back to the business at hand, and there is a lot of it.
Well, to that point, what happens with the bills that Frank Artiles was championing or sponsoring even?
Well, if they have companions in the House, they may be able to move forward. But if they are good bills, if they, a good bill from a scoundrel is still a good bill.
Right.
you
And in transportation in the past, he has a reputation of
he-
doing some positive
Right,
things.
for MDX. I mean, he had done some good things. Let me just say, if anybody's tuned in late, we invited former Senator Artiles to come explain his point of view, and we're sorry that he did not.
I got the sense that he, for a moment, considered it.
Yeah, well, I'm
Maybe he'll
glad he
join you in the
did.
future.
Went that far. All right, everybody, hold your thoughts. We're going to come back with more of the roundtable in just a minute. We are in the midst of a robust roundtable. We are with Nancy Ankrum of the Miami Herald editorial page editor, Raphael Yanez, and the one and only H.T. Smith. H.T., I've got to say, when I read the story in yesterday's Miami Herald by a fine reporter, Mary Ellen Klaus, who found that two very attractive young women had been hired by a political action committee of Senator Artiles as consultants and paid altogether, not that much, maybe $2,500. But if you put it within the larger context, this money was being spent for fundraising at the Kentucky Derby, at a fishing tournament in Key West. I mean, what it looks like is people who are being extorted or writing checks to these politicians, Senator Artiles at the time, you know, are underwriting one big, fabulous party. And I guess they just brought along a couple of attractive young women to sort of, you know, prettify the situation.
If there's anything that's good that came out of it for Senator Artiles, is that he won't have to answer questions from you and Glenna and Nancy about that. I have a feeling there's no good explanation, and the people who gave him the money, and they gave him a lot of money,
Yeah,
they're going to be very disappointed that he's using the money for things like that.
He raised $850,000 on his own and got what, $1.9 million or 1.7 from the incoming Senate president. We're talking about a lot of money.
Exactly. I think we're also talking about business as usual. This was not an Artiles
There you go.
problem. This is, I think that this is Tallahassee.
Yeah.
This is how it's done.
Incumbent upon
Right.
us as journalists to follow that money.
Exactly.
But Michael, I'll respectfully disagree. If I heard you correctly, you said extorted, then maybe some donors feel that they're extorted, but I have fundraised extensively at the federal level, and I can say, in all honesty, every donor I've worked with never says they feel extorted. Because I don't charge money for what I do it on a volunteer basis, but they do it because they're supporting someone.
All right.
Here, this money is misspent, though.
I'll stipulate to that, Counselor, but I have to say, there are. If I had written a check for $5,000,
You wanted to go towards the
I
campaign,
wanted
not
to go
towards
to
the
the
Kentucky
campaign,
Derby.
not to a couple of
I'm
young,
with you on that.
You know,
I'm 100%
attractive
with
women
you on
who
that.
are consultants who do.
And you better believe there's an investigative reporter somewhere in the state of Florida about to look into some of those other
You're
campaigns
absolutely
as a
right.
result of that.
All right, let's move on to Venezuela. We had a report from our reporter in Caracas. We heard from Ernesto Ackerman. Nancy, this situation just simply cannot continue.
It cannot. It cannot continue. The end game, however, is very unclear. I had a chance to discuss Venezuela this week with Luis Almagro. He is the leader of the OAS, and Venezuela is his priority, is his main concern. He still wants to proceed with tough love, as opposed to moving to remove Venezuela from the OAS. I think his
what is tough love?
More and more international pressure, and
Which Ernesto Ackerman in the previous segment indicated may be working.
Right, exactly. You know, he sees that as, he said, look, and I'm paraphrasing, you know, Venezuela is at the table, it's in the tent. If there's an expulsion effort, then it's free floating out there. We have no leverage after that.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that he is being cautious, and I don't want to say cautiously optimistic, but as you said, it is bearing some fruit.
And this can have a tremendous effect on South Florida. And I think that we need to educate ourselves about what's going on and what will happen. A lot of people woke up this morning and said, Maduro cannot feed his people. They don't have medicine and a lot of the personal essentials. Why did he contribute $500,000 to Donald Trump's inauguration campaign? What was he looking for? And so we're going to watch that very carefully as well. But those people are courageous to be in the streets.
And so is your reporter, Cody Weddle, down there. Channel 10 is a cut above the rest with your bureaus in different cities.
Thank you, Raphael, on everyone's behalf.
Well, it really shines through that Channel 10 is willing to invest in the story. And this is one of the greatest humanitarian issues going on geopolitically. It's in our backyard. And when you see all these millions of people who are protesting and the strategic indifference of this administration, the Obama administration, to a certain degree, the Bush administration before it, cannot continue.
You know what strikes me is that so many parallels are made to the Maduro government and the Castro government in Cuba. The one
supports the other,
of course, but the one and the people are enduring so many similar instances. But to me, there are people out in the street protesting the government by the tens of thousands that you never saw or see in Cuba. That's confusing to me.
Well, I think that they get democracy I mean, so do people in Cuba.
With less backlash,
Right,
certainly backlash,
exactly.
but not like you would see a
They
government
were
crackdown.
able to vote. And they are saying this is not what we signed up for.
Right.
And that is a big, big difference. And they don't have the mechanisms that the Castros put in effect with having spies almost on every street to be able to stop things before they can even get
But
organized.
the Castro regime has been reported through intelligence agencies and international reports, has been supporting and informing the leadership in Venezuela, Maduro and under Chavez, to the extent where Maduro and Chavez, who's now dead, they wouldn't fly on airplanes flown by Venezuelans. It was all Cuban military flying them around on Cuban aircraft. That speaks volumes.
That's going to be the last word and a good one to end. Raphael, HT, Nancy, great to have you come
Thanks
in.
so much.
Thank you.
As
Wonderful
always.
roundtable.
Thank you.
Coming up next, the story of the senator. What happens after the rise and fall is probably the most important part. Stay with us.
On to the weather. Here is a live look now from our Hollywood beach cam. Boy, it's wet out there.
Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa and brand new mommy is here with the rainy Sunday forecast. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Glenna and Michael. Yes, it is wet out there. In fact, we have flood advisories still remaining in effect for Broward County. Basically, the only area that's out of a flood advisory in Broward is Hollywood, but mostly all of the county is under some heavy rain. Of course, this could change as right now Hollywood Beach is starting to see some very heavy rainfall. Widespread rain does continue on, not only for Broward, but down into Miami-Dade, now down into Kendall. And rainfall amounts are topping at least 2 inches in a few spots already. We could see localized amounts anywhere between 4 to 6 inches. Now, this is good news because it will put a dent into the rainfall. Once this passes through, a cold front comes our way tomorrow, and then sunshine and cooler weather is back on Tuesday. Glenna?
Jennifer, thanks very much. Finally today, some hindsight as foresight as, once again, a person in position of public trust in just a few words seemed to violate it. Late this week, I asked some pastors celebrating the resignation of Senator Frank Artiles whether they believed he had, in his tenure, done any good as a lawmaker, as a Marine in service to the country, and their answer was, one wrong can undo a lot of right. For the record, this is not in defense of Frank Artiles, but he is far from the first elected official or public figure to say something deeply offensive and hurtful. That list is very long, and that's just the instances we find out about. And one of the more obvious examples, not very long ago, we got to hear the candidate who would be our president aboard a celebrity's bus bragging about how his stardom gave him liberties with women, complete with vulgarities. The issue is not with words. It's not about being PC, politically correct. It's about real fear that the personal prejudice of someone in power could eventually translate to institutionalized discrimination. The chaos it caused in Tallahassee this week made Artiles' resignation the right thing to do, as he himself outlined in his letter to the Senate president. The question now is, what comes next? Does his story follow that narrative arc, rise, fall, and redemption? Like so many before him, Artiles rose, and this week he fell. And how he gets to redemption is his personal journey, and of course that of his family. And we hope to hear from him about that, because probably that will be the most important part of this story. And so we ask, what do you think about that or anything in the news? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like.
And here is a list of how to reach us. Facebook, Twitter, any of these addresses. We're easy to reach. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And try to have a beautiful Sunday and a dry one.
See you next week.